We're going to go live. We'll give it a moment here for everyone to join. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're live on Facebook. We're going to give everything a minute here, and we're going to get rolling. Okay, we're going to go live on YouTube. Now we're live on Zoom. We're going to do one more live on the other Facebook channels and gegangen. Hi, we're live. Good evening, Jane. Okay, we have one more share and we should be good to go. Okay, we are done sharing. We are on all our platforms as far as I know. And good evening, Kayla Gittel. And we are good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Parshas Tetzaveh. It is, more than halfway through the book of Exodus, the book of Shmos. And we're going to begin right at the beginning of the Parsha. And we're actually going to go into a very, very fascinating Talmudic. If you ever wondered what it's like in a yeshiva and how they think things through and how they have different svaras, which means different points of view. You ever see the image of yeshiva students with a thumb in the air like this? Aber Rabbi sagt, and Rabbi sagt Gott anders, and they go back and forth, and you have to hear both sides of it, both points of view, because they both represent not just an opinion. Opinions are very cheap, and we know that from our society today. Opinions are a dime a dozen. People have opinions, and they have no idea what they're talking. Primarily, have no idea what they're talking about. But when you're dealing with intellectual Torah opinions, it makes a big difference what the reasoning and the depth behind each opinion is. And today we're going to do a little bit of that. But let's start with the verse right at the top of page 501. We're using the regular chumash, the life chumash that we use here. Top of page 501, right at the beginning of the parsha. The Ata Tetzaves B'nei Yisrael, V'yikhu Elecha Shemen Zayis Zav, Pasis Lamor, Lahalois Ner Tamid. And in English, you should command, this is God talking to Moses, and you should command the children of Israel that they should bring it to you, they should bring to you clear olive oil, crushed for lighting, to ignite the lamp until it burns continually. So in the tabernacle and later in the temple, there was a menorah, there was a candelabra. It had 7 candles, 3 protruding from each side of the main branch, and then 1 at the center. Those 7 candles, by the way, just to make sure no one makes the mistake, I think I mentioned it recently in a different class, that we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. It has nothing to do with the amount of candles on the menorah in the temple. It has to do with the amount of days that the oil lasted. There was enough oil for 1 day and it lasted 8 days. It has nothing to do with the size of the menorah. The menorah had 7 branches, 1 in the center and 3 on each side. Now we got that out of the way. The verse tells us that we need oil for lighting, and it says clear olive oil crushed for lighting, because we need to have the purest oil for the tabernacle. Very straight up, you need oil.
EVO.
What?
Extra
virgin olive oil. And you need to have good, pure, clean olive oil. But here's where it becomes very, very interesting. Because we have the primary commentator on the Torah is Rashi. What does Rashi say on the words, V'ata tetzaveh, you shall command? Then it says, Zaf, that the oil should be pure. Rashi says, Bli shmorim, without sediment. The oil is to be so pure that there's no sediment from the olive that remains in the oil that will make it less clear, less bright, less pure. It needs to be clear of everything, including sediment. And then Rashi says, K'moishe shoninu, as we learned in the Mishnah in Menachos. There's an entire tractate of the Talmud called Menachos. It's a tractate that discusses the carbon mincha, the meal offerings that were brought in the tabernacle and later in the temple. Yeah, the mincha. And the flour offering that was, with oil and frankincense and whatever the makeup. We're not discussing the mincha offering today, but over there in the tractate of Menachos, it says on page 86a, Megargere Bereish Hazayis. It discusses over there various ways in which we press oil. And there's oil that you need for the menorah, for the candelabra and the mishkan and the tabernacle. And then there's oil that you need for the various other offerings in which you mix oil with flour and frankincense. And so he says over there in the tractate of Menachos, that when they go to the top of the olive tree, the olives that they find on the top, the ones that grew first, the ones that are most noticeable, those you take off and you use them for the olive oil for the menorah, and the rest of the olives level 2 and olives level 3, you use for the other offerings. That's what the Talmud says in the tractate of Menachos. This is the quote from Rashi. End quote. So Rashi's emphasis is that the oil that we use for the menorah needs to be pure, clear, without sediment. The oil needs to be the best possible oil. And here's where my excitement kicks in. Because what I share with you now is from I always say it's incredible because it always is. It's an incredible talk from the Rebbe. Another incredible talk from the Rebbe, this time from the winter of 1965. The Rebbe says there's another great commentator on the Torah, the Even Ezra. Rabbi Avram Even Ezra. The Even Ezra was one of the Rishonim. He's one of the original Torah commentators, like in the era of Rashi. I believe the Even Ezra, here, I'll tell you right now, I believe it was 11th or 10th, 12th century, but let me just make sure before I tell you. I don't like selling a load of goods, but Rabbi Avram Even Ezra, when did he live? So Avram Even Ezra, he was 12th century, and he was a rabbi in mostly in Spain, Zaragoza and other places, but one of the prime commentators there's Rashi, there's Kli Yakar, there's Even Ezra, there's Sforno, there's like the top 5 in every chumash you have, and Even Ezra is one of them. Nachmanides, Ramban. The Even Ezra says as follows. While Rashi told us that the oil needs to be pure, that when it says pure, it means the oil free of sediment, undiluted, pure, clear oil, the Even Ezra says it's not the oil we're talking about. When it says that it needs to be pure, we're talking about the olive, not the oil. That the olive that you use for the oil for the menorah, the olive needs to be unblemished, it needs to be unspoiled, it needs to be not beaten and rotten and half, by the way, it's pretty normal when you collect fruit from a tree. Some of them aren't in the best condition. So while Rashi's emphasis was on the purity and the lack of sediment in the oil, Even Ezra says we're not talking about the oil, we're talking about the olive. Okay, it sounds like a pretty basic argument. Okay, you say olive, I say oil. You say oil, I say olive. But of course, there's much more depth here. And in that Farbrengen in 65, the Rebbe addressed it in a very profound way because it really affects each of us and how we live our lives as it relates to the mitzvahs and the things we do for God. And he said as follows. There's a famous teaching of the Rambam, of Maimonides. So Maimonides, another one of the Rishonim, earlier than these rabbis. I'm sorry, earlier than Even Ezra, but not earlier than Rashi. The Rambam in the end, in Seif Hilchos Isuri Mizbeach, in the laws of altar prohibitions, the things that are prohibited on the altar, basically the laws of what transpires on the altar in the tabernacle, the Rambam Maimonides says as follows. Someone that wants to purify themselves, you want to do some character refinement, says the Rambam, Yachoy Yitzrei Hara. You should overcome, you should overpower your evil inclination. The Yarchiv Yada, you should expand your hand, meaning go big. The Yavi Karbonai, when you bring an offering to God, you should bring it min hayafa, from the nicest, hameshubach biyoser, the most fatty, delicious, in this case it's animal. When you bring it, if you really want to overcome your evil inclination, you want to overpower your negative force inside of you, when you come to bring an offering to Hashem, bring your nicest, bring the best, bring the juiciest. And this is the law, says the Rambam, in everything that you do for God. that it should be from your best and your most enjoyable aspects of your life, as it says, Kol chelav Hashem, all the fatty fats, all the most fatty parts of the animal should go to Hashem. And we learn from that the juicy, delicious parts of the animal, the most exciting parts of your life that you really want to keep for yourself because you're very selfish, if you want to prove your expansiveness and you want to prove to yourself that you're capable of overcoming your evil inclination, when you come to giving to Hashem, give big. Give your best to God, not your second best. You ever hear people that talk about, well, I need to give charity, but I have a list of like 82 things that have to come first, and then we have spot for God. If someone can't give charity, they can't give charity. Sadly, they're dealing with poverty. No, that's between them and God, and it's a real thing. But when someone has 180 things to do before their tzedakah, it goes in the face of this Rambam. The Rambam is teaching us this fundamental idea that when we come to give items to God, whether it's in the actual tabernacle or in our lives, by the way, another example of that would be, what's the best part of your day? The Chassidus talks about it. The best part of a person's day is when they wake up in the morning. Their brain is fresh. They've just rested. Don't give that first part of your day to Wall Street. Don't give that first part of your day to your emails and your texts. Don't give that first part of your day to the fakakta news that's going to give you an aneurysm. Give that part of the day, the best of the day, the juicy of the Tashem. What would happen if you turn on your phone an hour later? The world, you think, is not going to be standing? But if you get up straight out of bed and you wash your hands and you thank Hashem with the blessings in the morning, and then you daven and you give a nickel in the tzedakah box and you try to be more spiritual and holy, then you're there. You gave your juices, you gave your best to Hashem. So that's just a general teaching from the Rambam. What does that have to do with the olive and the oil? What does that have to do with Rashi's opinion that we're talking about the purity of oil and Ibn Ezra's opinion that we're talking about the purity of the olive? So here we get the Talmudic, as we say in Yiddish, the Gedicht, the inner kishkis, the intestines of Judaism, right in the center mass of the whole thing. And that is, there's a famous, and it's universal, meaning it's used in many different contexts. But in halacha, there's a concept of gavra and there's a concept of chefetz, which means an object or a person. Gavra is from the word in Hebrew gever, which means the person. Chefetz is from the word in Hebrew chefetz, which means the item, the object. And it manifests itself in many different laws, right? With certain prohibitions. Is it a prohibition on the item, or is it a prohibition on the person to come in contact with the item? And again, it has many differences in halacha. But as it relates to this debate between Rashi and the Ibn Ezra about the oil and the olive, it's very, very powerful. When a person brings an item to God, right? If we take the Rambam's idea to heart that you have to give your best to Hashem, is the goal that the end product that you're giving to God, not the process in getting there. Your job is to give God your best. So you have to make sure that the object needs to be its best. The item that you're going to consecrate and give to God needs to be its best. And therefore, as long as the end product is its best and it's the juiciest and the best, you're in good shape. But if it's on the gavra, if it's on the person, not on the item, then it's not only about the end product, it's also the process in order to get to the end product should also be done with the juiciest and the most perfect parts of the things you own should be invested in it for God. It's not enough about what you end up producing, it's how you gave of yourself along the way to make that process a reality. So in case that was too complicated for you, I'm going to say it in simple English.
In service? You were in service?
Huh?
In service?
Of course in service, but giving your best. But the practical, right? Let's talk about practical. Rashi says that you want to give it without sediment. In other words, Rashi's not worried about the person here. Rashi's worried about the chafza, about the item. And being that the item that you're bringing to the tabernacle of God for the menorah, for the candelabra, needs to be the purest oil, that's all Rashi's emphasis on. What is the end product you brought to the temple? Did you bring pure oil? Perfect. There's no sediment. It's undiluted. It's clear. Fantastic. because all that Rashi is concerned with is the chefta, the item that is brought to God and its status. The Ibn Ezra, on the other hand, says, hold on. The goal of what the Rambam taught was that everything you do, everything the person does should be done with its best and its juiciest and its most prestigious, pristine parts of himself, and the item should be for Hashem. Therefore, if Hashem says to bring pure, undiluted, clear olive oil to the tabernacle, it's not enough just to bring the olive oil. The olive itself, Ibn Ezra says, needs to be a beautiful olive. You need to, when you start the process already, it's not enough to bring, the end game. Right? Let's say it's all about the end game. I'm going to give you a very extreme example. Someone says, you know what, I want to drop off 100 grand at the synagogue. What does it matter where it came from?
For what condition?
No. What does it matter where it came from? The bottom line is, the shul has now 100 grand to do holy things. According to Rashi, you gave an item that's sediment-free. It's pure. The end product could be used in holiness. Fantastic. Ibn Ezra comes along and says, "What are you talking about?" So okay. If it was really from an evil source, even Rashi would agree that it in itself has unholiness in it. But and again, I said it's an extreme example, but Ibn Ezra is saying that the process in itself to get to the mitzvah, the process in itself to bring an item to God, should also be a holy process, should also be a process of refinement, should also be a process in which you're picking the best and the juiciest to bring the end product to Hashem. You shouldn't cut corners just because the end product can still look pure and look clear and look undiluted and be sediment-free. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention for your own benefit, for your own service of Hashem, because it's about the Gavra, according to Ibn Ezra. It's about the person that you invest your best and choose your best and choicest in order to make the end game of pure oil. So in other words, Ibn Ezra doesn't disagree with Rashi that the oil has to be pure and free of sediment. What Ibn Ezra disagrees with Rashi is about the process to get there. Rashi wasn't concerned with that. The Ibn Ezra, and not only intent. Ibn Ezra was not only, no, intent is a separate thing. It's the process. What are you utilizing to make that oil a reality? Are you using good olives? He says, if it's olive oil, who cares what the olive looked like? Well, the olive had a dent. The olive had an issue. The olive had a black stain on it. Who cares? The bottom line is, I got you pure oil. And that's why Rashi quotes this random teaching in the tractate of the Talmud of Menachos that says that when you go to cut the olives off the tree before you crush them, so I'm a gargaroi, when you go to pick the olives for olive oil for the menorah, you do it b'rosh hazayis, on the top of the tree. Why? Top of the tree, hold on. Top of the tree is the part of the tree that has the most vulnerability and has the most exposure, which means the birds can nibble on it more than anywhere else. In other words, it's not going to be the most good-looking olives, and yet Rashi's emphasizing that I'm not worried about if it's good-looking or not. Rashi says, you know what I'm worried about? That the end product be the most pure, clear olive oil possible. Ibn Ezra doesn't quote that mission. Because the Ibn Ezra feels like it's not enough just to show up with pure oil. The process to get there needs to be a pure process too. You ever see in courtrooms, I mean, Chalila lahavdil to ever compare the two, but if you see in a courtroom where judges many times throw out evidence, why not? Why are you throwing it out? It's absolute evidence. It was obtained illegally. But who cares? If your point is to prove that this person did the crime and you have a tape where he's admitting to it, why aren't you admitting it into court? Well, that tape was recorded illegally. So what?
It could have been adulterated.
No, that's not the reason they throw it out. They throw it out because there's a legal system that says that you have to gather evidence. Even when you're gathering evidence for a terrible crime, you have to gather evidence in a legal manner. Now, again, that's
breaking into somebody's home, so to speak.
No, there's hundreds of laws of how you're allowed to obtain evidence and how you have to treat evidence. And if you leave evidence unsupervised for 5 minutes, you could lose your whole evidence because you don't know if someone tainted in those 5 minutes. There's all these laws. That's why, I mean, if you ever meet a detective or a cop that's investigating a crime that has DNA, like any type of physical evidence, they're bananas. They go bananas about how careful they are, because if they make one mistake in how they obtain the evidence, it goes in the garbage. There's no point in it. You can have the best evidence, right? Now, you don't remember the OJ case? How many things in the OJ case were thrown out because it was obtained? It was obtained illegally, or they messed up, whatever. The point is, when it comes to spirituality, too often, like Rashi, too often we get stuck on, or we get happy enough, or we suffice with, well, as long as we got the end game, we got what we needed. We got pure oil. But how did you get the pure oil? Even Ezra is not really debating and arguing against Rashi. He's just saying we need to go a step further. We need to go a step above and say, you know what? Yes, the end game is obviously the pure oil. We need the pure oil. That's the goal. We need to be able to light a menorah. You can't light a menorah without pure oil, right? Let's talk bottom line. You got to light a menorah. But Even Ezra says, I want you to get beautiful, the nicest, purest, choicest olives as well. Because forget about what that does for the oil. It may not do anything for the oil. Because it's not only about the chefta, it's not only about the object, it's about the gavra, it's about the person, what it does for us. And when we invest our time and energy and sweat, toil and blood, and our money to produce something for God, to produce a mitzvah for God, to produce something for Judaism, to produce something for spirituality and holiness, but we do it half-baked. We're not invested with heart and soul. We do it. Let's get it done, man. But what about the process? Are you invested in the process? Is it making you a better person because you're giving so much of yourself to make sure the process itself is done so well? If you're not, it's okay. It's going to end up being oil for the menorah, but is that really the type of oil you want? Even Ezra says, no. I want oil for the menorah that's not only about the cheftzah, that's not only about the object, but it's about the gavra, it's about the person and what they've invested and what they've toiled and what they've brought to the forefront in their devotion to making this mitzvah a reality. It's hot stuff. When I read this morning at 5 o'clock, when I read this teaching, I was like, it's incredible depth. Because too often we get caught up with the cheftzah, with the bottom line, with the item, with the object, and we forget the gavra. It's one of the reasons, by the way, I mean, it's totally unrelated to the class, and I did not plan on talking about this. If you remember, I want to say 2-3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I gave a class. Actually, I think it was one of those COVID classes that I gave with that hazmat plastic fakakta mask in front, the shield in front of my face, one of those special ones. But it was a whole class about the debate that happened 150 years ago about machine matzah versus handmade matzah. It's a big halachic debate. It's way beyond the scope of today's class. If you email me later, I can send you some of the information about it. It's a fascinating halachic debate. But one of the key things I remember from that class when I was teaching it is that one of the big emphasis that the rabbis who demanded, and by the way, Chabad, we are one of those, that the matzah you eat on Pesach should not be made by a machine. It should only be made by a human. Even though there's maybe even more potential for error with a human than a machine, especially these days. So why risk it with a human? Because the mitzvah you're going to participate in is not just about the mitzvah, it's about the process. There was a Jew, or in the case of most shmura matzah, handmade matzah, it was many Jews that had to knead the dough, they had to cut the wheat, then knead the dough and roll it and pin it and put it on the thing and get it in and out of the oven in less than 18 minutes. The hand investment, the human investment in the mitzvah made all the difference. Because there's nothing that can come in the way of the energy and power that's created from a human being toiling with every fiber of their soul, with every fiber of their being, to do something for God with their ganze neshama, with their whole soul. Not just because, well, got to do it. Somebody told me something today. I was meeting with someone today in the office, and he said, Rabbi, I was soliciting him for funds for the shul, and he said, you know something, every time I walk into shul, it's amazing what happens when I walk in the door. The warmth and the comfortability that I feel reminds me of when I used to go to shul with my father back, 50 years ago. And it just feels so right. And I feel like they're there with me. My father's with me in shul. So it was a beautiful. I said to him, I said, that's a very beautiful thing to say because everyone expresses themselves differently. This was the way he expressed himself, and I was sitting there. I was like, that's just beautiful to hear. And I think that we forget that when we're doing a mitzvah, when we're coming to shul, when we're lighting Shabbos candles, when we're putting on tefillin, when we're eating matzah, when we're listening to the Megillah, when we're hearing the shofar, whatever mitzvah we're doing, don't do it because you have to get it done. Don't do it because you feel obliged. I don't like it. It's very rare you meet a Jew that says, "Oh, I do it because I'm scared I'm going to go get punished in hell." It's not our thing. Besides, like I've told you many times, if you're ever worried about hell, just go to Disney World. It won't scare you anymore. It can't be any worse. But the point is, I say that with my whole neshama actually. But the point is, don't do Judaism half baked. If you're gonna do it, for lack of a better term, get your money's worth. Do it because you know it's right. Do it because your soul yearns for it. Do it and invest in it with all your kayach, with all your strength and energy. Rashi says, okay, you bring oil, it's good, it's oil, that's it, we got the bottom line, we got the oil. Yeah. But is that the oil you want, or do you want the oil that the olive was already chosen with love? That the person was so invested that as he went through the process of climbing the tree to cut the olives, to crush the olives, to produce the oil, he wasn't only focused on the end game, he wanted the process in itself to be a holy, godly, transformative process for himself. And if we could take that idea from the Ibn Ezra on, it allows for something very powerful. Because, if you study Chassidus, you know that there's one aspect of Chassidus says that if you look, an olive is one of the most bitter, right? An olive right off the tree, unpickled and unbrined, is not a very exciting experience to taste. It's a very, very bitter food item. So on the one hand, Chassidus says that the olive represents bitterness. It represents things that are harsh, that separate us from our source of comfort, our source of pleasure, which is holiness. The natural place for a person in a state of holiness. Bitterness is when we don't give access to that. So in a sense, the olive in its bitter state represents klipa, represents those separating forces, dividing forces that take us away and separate us from holiness. On the other hand, in Chassidus, it says that shemen, oil, represents the most mystical, deepest ideas, the soidos, the most deep secrets, just like an olive has oil hidden inside of it. So the outside is bitter, but the inside is so pure and amazing. So too, the Torah on the outside could seem rough and tough, a cow gores an ox, but the mystical inner beauty of the Torah is the oil. It's the mysticism. It's the Chassidus, the spirituality of Torah.
And light.
And the light. The oil makes the light. The mysticism makes the light. Very good, Mitchell. So, on the one hand, it's bitter. On the other hand, it creates the light. And Rashi is always the one that gives us the most practical interpretation of the Torah, but also the one that gives us a little glimpse into the Yenush of Torah, the wine of Torah, the mystical of Torah. So he goes straight to the olive oil. That's the bottom line. You know what an olive is? I don't look at the externals. I'm going straight to the innards. What's the innards? Pure oil. No sediment, pure. Ibn Ezra was like, whoa. Don't get so holy on me, Mr. Rashi. Even the bitterness of the olive can be transformed. If you give it the right attention, if you give it the right service, if you work with the bitterness, you can turn it into a delicious olive, but that takes a lot more work. Sure, you could just squeeze out the oil and get just whatever you need from it, the purity, the beauty, whatever. There's something much bigger that you have there. If you have the ability to find a way to transform the bitterness of the olive and turn it into something much better. And so Chassidus is telling us that if you take the Ibn Ezra's path, it's not just about getting the end game. It's about the process that gets you there. To go through that process of transforming the bitterness of the olive, and of course, eventually you get the beautiful oil, like the delicious oil that comes from within. But to get to that level of mysticism, right? There's a reason why on Lag BaOmer, the day Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit, when he passed away, right? What are we seeing? There's always an image of a fire. Why fire? Because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai taught the Zohar. He's the author of the Zohar, the original mystical book. And mysticism and oil and fire is all one and the same. Mysticism is the inner core, which is the oil that lights the fire. That's why we sing Bar Yochai Nimshachta Ashrecha Shemen Sasom, right? Shemen Sasom, the oil of joy. Right? What's the oil of joy? The mysticism. So Rashi says, go straight for the mysticism, go straight for the essence. Don't pay attention to the bitterness. Don't get obsessed with the challenges. You get right to the core. But Evan Ezra says, why? Why ignore the challenge? Why ignore the bitterness? Take the bitterness head on and transform it. Neither of them are wrong. It's two different paths. But in this case, the path of Chassidus is not to ignore the bitterness. Right? When do we get impressed by a good chef? Right? I've never met anyone that walked around for 5 years saying, "Oh, I met a chef who made an incredible scrambled egg." Even if the chef did make a nice omelet, no one talks about it for more than 3 minutes. Why? This is an omelet. What do you have to be, a rocket scientist to make an omelet? But if someone takes, I don't know, if a chef figures out how to take chicken wings, right? If you ever clean the chicken for Shabbos, chicken wings. Who wants to touch this little nothing full of bones? If somehow he took a chicken wing and turned it into something really delicious, you go, oh, I could never do that. Took a fakakta chicken wing and turned it into that. I'm very impressed. Or if someone takes, I don't know, what's a vegetable that you don't like? I don't know, pick up okra. I don't know, I've never even tried that. Someone took kale and made it delicious, right? Kale. If somehow miraculously they made it delicious. I know. I knew the yoga part of you. I like kale too. I like kale too if the right person seasons it. But going back, if someone took kale and made it into something and you ate it and you just stood there like, wow, how did they take a fakakta piece of kale and do that? Now you're impressed. Because making a scrambled egg is no biggie. Celebrating the oil and the mysticism and the light that comes from the olive, that's no chachma, that's no specialty. To take the Evan Ezra's approach and make the process important and recognize that you have the ability through the process to take the olive and its bitterness and transform it into something delicious. Take okra and make it yum. Take kale and make it into a kale green apple salad that takes 3 months to produce and eventually it tastes somewhat good, almost like a hot dog. I knew I had to do that.
Did you see the bottom here, 501, the last thing, God's land?
501.
God's land is man's soul, and how often we provide it with fuel.
Yeah.
And the fuel should be
the oil, the fuel. So there you go. So, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, my dear students, the lesson of this week from the Evan Ezra is that don't suffice with Rashi. Don't suffice with just making sure that the end game, the end product, the oil doesn't have sediments. Celebrate the process. Even if the process is long and gruesome and tiring, even if it takes sweat, blood, and toil, it's the beauty of the process that allows for the eventual oil to shine even brighter and more pure than ever before, because you didn't just invest time in getting the end game done. It meant so much to you. Your relationship with God was so special to you that even the process, you recognize that the Gavra, the person, is a big part of this process. And when I emphasize not just the object, but the individual, it changes the whole approach. And then we're living life not just waiting for every day for the end game. Oh, as long as I got her done, whatever. No. Right? In Judaism, for example, it's not enough to give tzedakah. It says that when you give tzedakah to a poor person, you have to do it the sever panim yafos, with the delightful face. A tzedakah, there you go. She has a pushka right there when you give it, but that's when you're giving it into a box. When you give it to a person, no, Margot, you're right. You should always put money in the tzedakah box. We do it every morning. But when you're giving to a person, don't give them cash and like, hey, get out of my face. Take your dollar and get lost. But don't do it. You're going to give someone a tzedakah, you're going to give them 50 cents, $1, $5, $10. Do it with a smile. Do it because you care. Show them that you have compassion and empathy and love. And then you're proving that it's not just about the end game. Right? Because according to the Rambam, by the way, if you lose $1, let's say $1 falls out of your pocket, and a poor person finds it and they enjoy it, they pick it up, they find it, and they keep it. and they buy themselves food with it, you end up getting the mitzvah. Even though you never intended to give it to them, but because it was your money and you lost it and they took it. But that's not how you want to fulfill the mitzvah. You want to be able to stand there face to face, like a mensch, with love and empathy and compassion and mercy, and give them $1 and say, man, brother, I love you. You know, there was a guy here at the Super Bowl party who, when I saw him, I was like, hey, I recognize you. Where do I know you from? He goes, oh, I said, you work at the UPS store. He works at the UPS store on Main Street, but he doesn't have a house to live in yet, so he lives at the shelter. So 2 days later, I was coming in. The Super Bowl was on Sunday. On Tuesday after, I came into the UPS store, and I see him, Jamal. He's at the counter, a black guy. I said, yo, my man, Jamal, what's going on? And the whole store is looking like, here's the rabbi with the yarmulke, Jamal, the black guy, like somehow they grew up in the hood together. So he turns to the owner of the UPS store, Laura, and he goes, hey, Laura, that's the guy, hey, boss, that's the guy I told you about that made us the party. And she looks at me, she knows me for years, and she goes, I knew it had to be the rabbi that did that. So everyone's looking in the store, and I go, hey, me and Jamal grew up in the hood together. I met him like 2 days ago. Everyone's like, my point is, it's not just about giving them food and clothing. We need to treat people. The process of that needs to also be genuine. It needs to also be real. You need to give it your best. And then you're doing the mitzvah in the utmost healthy way possible, spiritual way possible, because now the spirituality and the holiness has embedded not just the end game, but also the process to which the process on the road to getting there. So let's make our processes holy. Let's make our processes valuable. Let's not just focus on the end game. Let's invest in the details to recognize that the details that we invest in on that journey are valuable, godly, holy, and make us, the Gavra, not just the Chefza, much better people. Have a wonderful week. I have a meeting next Wednesday in Great Falls, but I believe I will be back for class Wednesday night. Great Falls? 3 hours there, 3 hours back. We're going to have a Chabad rabbis meeting up in Great Falls of all the rabbis, God willing. But I should be back on time. God, Be'ezrat Hashem. And the sun is shining. I'll see you next Wednesday. Have a rocking week. Parshas Tetzaveh. Go to shul. Be inspired. And if you're in Montana and you didn't get tickets to Shalom Lemmer's concert, get it or else. I'll talk to you later. Zay gesund.
I thought you were going to talk about the breastplate. After this beautiful picture, you said that. I look
good, no? A little sad. I look like my mother gave me a